Let's turn up the volume. Hello, hello, hello. I really should just give me a light for behind my computer. I don't get enough support for that. Here we are, Illiberal America. This was another book I found while I was waiting for them to get my book from downstairs in the library. And I was flipping through it, and I'm going to read from chapter 8, the other 1960s, because one of the mistakes we make is we look at times when we have rebellious moments, social upheaval, revolutionary moments where we're pushing for sanity. Because basically at this point, it's sanity versus insanity. You're pushing for a sane society against people who are just destructive and brutal. And sometimes we win. We get space. We push forward. We have victories. And we tend to think that's it. Now we move to another chapter in life. But that's not how it works. The people you beat keep fighting. It never ends. That's why the South today looks like the Confederacy looked in the 1800s, before the Civil War, right? And the North does too. There's a lot of things in this society until 2020 hit, and we really had a shift toward the Great Reset. A lot of things that looked like 2020, 1920, 1820. Right? It's particularly where black people are concerned, but in a lot of ways. And if you look at what's happening now, look at this, that's ridiculous. When you look at what's happening now, it was hot outside. I take these, man, sweating all the time. People get nervous when you sweat, because I wear a mask. But it was burning up. So what was I? So people are going through the same things now that they've been going through a lot in this country. I will say though, after 2020, we shifted. So what we're kind of stuck in these last 4 years is where residue, plantation residue, that system kind of, and those institutions kind of around, but they're not really working well. But people are still dependent on them as if they were at their heyday, and they get less and less resources. We're moving into something else. So we're going to do the other 1960s. On February 1964, George C. Wallace, the governor of Alabama, flew into Madison, Wisconsin, for a speaking engagement on the campus of the state university. It did not seem a likely destination. 1 year earlier, after a nasty race-fueled campaign, Wallace was inaugurated governor, pledging to maintain segregation now, tomorrow, and forever, which basically what happened until 2020. 5 months later, he stood and actually we still are in segregation, kind of. Only society's kind of integrated, but black people kind of dropped off out of society. We're in such deep, the bottom of society, that it seems like everybody's just getting along up here. But when you look down, that's what most of us are. 5 months later, he stood in the schoolhouse door of the University of Alabama in an unsuccessful, though highly publicized, effort to prevent the federal supported integration of that institution. But the summer of 1963, after the explosion demonstrations in Birmingham that left hundreds of black civil rights protesters injured by police dogs and fire hoses or jailed by the city police, Wallace seemed the embodiment of the battle against racial equality and for white supremacy. In Martin Luther King's eyes, Wallace was perhaps the most dangerous racist in America today. By the time he arrived at the University of Wisconsin, Wallace had already spoken at Harvard, Brown, Smith, and Dartmouth. Yale alone closed its doors to and some weeks later took his lecture tour to college campuses in the Midwest, Rocky Mountains, and Far West. Maybe 20 in all, although usually greeted by an assortment of civil rights protesters and activists. Wallace surprised audiences by bantering with hecklers, responding courteously to critical questions, and injecting humor into his presentations. Rather than discuss race or segregation, he focused on states' rights. And what do you hear people saying now? States' rights. By the way, both I was going to say Obama, both Trump and Biden are talking about states' rights. Obama was just talking about aspiration. I don't even know. He didn't really, I'm not going to say he didn't care about policy, but he didn't talk about it much. Issues of access to schools and other public accommodations or of open housing, he argued, were the province of states and municipalities, not the federal government. Somewhat bewildered, many of the students left with a more favorable opinion of Wallace, viewing him as thoughtful and reasonable. As the Daily Cardinal, the University of Wisconsin student newspaper, put it, he came, he saw, he conquered. You better get out there and vote for your mayors and your governors, because that's what we are. Every state's doing what it wants. And then if you're a regressive state, fight like hell to create alternative systems, institutions, and structures, ones that are sane, because they're coming after you, unless you're wealthy, and then it doesn't matter. But if you're just ordinary, even if you have your own little business, or you're a worker, even if you have quote unquote a good job, you need to fight, because what's coming down, it's not going to be good for you. Not long after Wallace returned to Wisconsin and headed toward the heavily Republican Fox River Valley, hoping to attract many conservatives. There in the small town of Appleton, hometown of Red Baiter Joseph McCarthy, Wallace announced, with little notice, his candidacy for the Democratic nomination for president. Beginning with a run in the fast approaching Wisconsin primary, Wallace made stops at all other small towns like Manitowoc, Sheboygan, and Howard's Grove. But his most enthusiastic reception came on Milwaukee's south side, at Serb Memorial Hall, where working class white ethnics have been angered, and agitated for integration and fair housing. The 700 people who jammed into the hall together, with another 300 left on the outside, heard Wallace denounce the Supreme Court for outlawing prayer in schools and encouraging the dropping of God from the Pledge of Allegiance. They also heard him launch an attack on the pending civil rights bill in Congress that would destroy the union seniority system, impose quotas, and make it impossible for a homeowner to sell his home to whoever he chooses. A vote for this little governor, Wallace concluded to thunderous applause, will let the people in Washington know that we want them to leave our homes, schools, jobs, businesses, and farms alone, so they could terrorize black people is basically what they wanted. A week later, Wallace won 1/3 of the Democratic vote in the state and repeated the electoral feat in Indiana and Maryland, where he won 16 to 23 counties, including Baltimore, before dropping out of the race. Today, we hear more states' rights talk than we have in the last quarter century. Wallace crowed. My mission has been accomplished. Let's read this next paragraph. Wallace's paeans to state rights, political decentralization, local control, and individual freedom from grasp of big government stood in marked contrast to the regime he was always building in Alabama. Like officials and police departments in many other states of the South, especially the Deep South, who sought to close ranks against civil rights activism by spearheading anti-subversive offensives. Wallace quickly moved to defend the Southern way of life. It all appeared another version of the state-established and enforced black subordination and humiliation that Southern elites began to fashion after Reconstruction. Reconstruction was the best time we ever had. We haven't had any Reconstruction, Black Power movement. Maybe those are the two best. I would say the Renaissance. They call it the Harlem Renaissance, but I think there was a Renaissance all around the country. We've had to do with art and culture and things like that. So that might be a third time. But we always have these little short periods, and then back to horror. But Wallace pushed even further to construct something of a personal fiefdom that harkened back to the world of Huey Long, though without the populist dimensions. He created an interconnected set of repressive institutions run from the top and organized on a basis of personal patronage, rewarding acolytes and punishing those who dared stand in his way. Before he ever set off on his northern tour of college campuses, Wallace had the Alabama state legislature create a peace commission, something of a star chamber to harass and suppress dissenters. A sovereignty commission tasked with unifying and fortifying the state's struggle against the federal juggernaut of civil rights, and a Department of Public Safety meant to collect troves of material on those, white and black, seen as posing threats to the regime and the segregationist order. Northern white voters who rallied to Wallace's candidacy in 1964 paid no mind. They understood him very clear and eagerly embraced his message. So that's what you get. That's the other side of America that you need to know about. A lot of crooks, a lot of corrupt crooks, pretending that they are for so-called white freedom, but they really just want to put other people beneath them. They never want to rise in the hierarchy or do away with the hierarchy. So that's all, as we used to say, fugazi. Until next time, remember, support by hitting the links. You can donate directly, or become a sponsor. But most of all, take care of yourselves and try to be safe.